Hey guys, Dan from worldofmrgrey, Dan Alpha Grey, and we're here with another true crime story. So, word of warning, there are going to be descriptions of crime scenes, vicious crime scenes about a serial killer. So, you have been warned, this is not for the faint-hearted. So today I want to talk about a lesser known serial killer, which is actually from North Wales, which is the country I'm from. And you always see about the usual suspects like Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, but this one is a lesser known one. He confessed to 4 murders, but he went on a reign of terror for at least 20 years. So we're going to go through them. Like I said, word of warning, this might not be for the faint-hearted. This is the story of Peter Moore, the Man in Black. Now, I've written notes for myself because obviously I've trailed various sources which I've linked down below. I've compiled them all together as much as I can from various details and what have you. So I'm going to be reading from my own notes. So Peter Moore was from North Wales. He was a former rail worker. He owned and managed various cinemas in and around North Wales, from Badgilt, Denbigh, Blaenau Ffestiniog, and Holyhead. In December 1995, he was arrested for 1 murder, but then later went on to confess to 4 murders. But he also confessed around to about 40 or 50 brutal attacks over the last 20 years preceding 1995. None of them were murders, apparently. They were vicious attacks. We're going to go through them starting from the beginning. Peter Moore was born in 1946 in Lancashire, England. When he was a young kid, he moved to North Wales. He was an openly gay man in and around North Wales and would frequent various bars at night. But he was always known as a softly spoken, mild-mannered guy by day who just ran various chains of cinemas. Behind the softly spoken smile, however, he was a Nazi enthusiast with a tendency for violence and slight obsession with Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th films, which will make sense of why I mention that when we get to further in. Throughout the 80s and 90s, he would brutally attack up to 40 to 50 men, sometimes at random. These were never murders, but they were brutal attacks, for reasons in his words which were just fun. Thanks to the prosecuting barrister Alex Carlisle, QC, later be known to the public as the Man in Black. Following is the accounts of his known murders, starting with his first murder victim, Henry Roberts. Henry Roberts was an openly gay man living in Anglesey, North Wales. A friend of Henry Roberts noticed one day that he hadn't been to the local pub in 3 days, so he went to go check on him at his home. He found the body at his friend's face down at the back of the house. His body was undressed with his lower body exposed. He had been stabbed 27 times. Moore would later confess that he turned up at Henry Roberts' house dressed in a Nazi uniform, knocked on his door, and just started to repeatedly stab him with a combat knife he bought just a few days previous. He said that Henry Roberts, on seeing his Nazi uniform, assumed he was there because he was Jewish, and he pleaded with Moore, "I'm not Jewish," thinking that's why he had gone to his house, which Moore just continues to stab him and kill him. Roberts' body was found the next day by the police. The second of his victims was Edward Coffey. Edward Coffey once again would frequent the local gay bars in and around Liverpool. He was last seen alive leaving a local club in October of 1995. Peter Moore was also at this club, which was a short ride from his North Wales home. He got to speaking to Coffey and offered him a ride home, but instead of driving him home, he drove Coffey to North Wales. Moore would later confess that Coffey started to feel nervous in the van and tried to get away, but for some reason he couldn't get away. Then he later went on to say that Coffey asked him, "Are you a Nielsen kind of fellow?" Nielsen as in Dennis Nielsen, the notorious serial killer from the 1970s, and to which Moore replied yes, and simply plunged the knife into his chest. Although Coffey was the second victim of Peter Moore, he wasn't found until later on after Peter Moore's confession, because he was never known to be murdered at the time. He was known to be missing, but that was about it. And he was found in a local forest after the confession. His third victim, Keith Randall, 49-year-old traffic manager, had just left his local fish shop in November 1995. He lived in the caravan on the side of the A5 road in Anglesey. That night, Peter Moore was driving past, decided for no reason whatsoever to pull over and see who was inside the caravan. Keith Randall was asleep when Moore knocked his door and without provocation started to repeatedly stab Randall's. Moore would later say in a confession that Randall's asked him, "Why are you doing this?" and Moore just replied, "For fun." Keith Randall's body was found the next day outside his caravan. His fourth and final victim was that of Anthony Davis of North Anglesey. The body of Anthony Davis was found on Pensarn Beach in Abergele one morning. He had been stabbed multiple times. On inspection of the crime scene the next morning, a drop of blood was found near the body of Davis. The police ran it for DNA and immediately Peter Moore flashed up on the system. Once they arrested Moore, they went on to search his property and they found numerous Nazi memorabilia items, uniforms, weapons, and they also found various items from the victims of the murders in his house, in and around the pond, outside his house. And they also found a knife, a big combat knife with bloodstains over it. Turns out it connected him to the victims, the murder victims, who at the time was only 3 of them they knew of. They didn't know about the 4th one, Edward Coffey. In Moore's confession, not only did he fully confess to the 4 murders, alongside drawing a diagram to Edward Carthy's body, which had not been known at the time. He also confessed to over 50 attacks over a period of 20 years. In the police interview, he would go on to tell them that over the previous 20 years, before he started murdering in September of 1995, he would dress up in either a police uniform or a Nazi uniform, drive around at night and just see any random passerby, attack them with a truncheon and just bloody them about the heads until they were unconscious or bleeding. For some reason, he never went to full murder then, although it's possible that he did and he just didn't say, because, over 20 years, over 50 people, the chances are that it didn't escalate to murder is quite slim, if you ask me. But for whatever reason, those people might not have come forward because of possible repercussions, because obviously they were local people, and they must have known that at some point there was a local person doing it. In his interview with the police, after confessing to the 4 murders and the 50 plus attacks over the 20 years, he went on to say that he found pleasure in being able to scare people. According to Moore, none of these people were killed as no one came forward, possibly due to the possible repercussions. We can only guess if what Moore said there was true. After Moore confessed, he tried to change his confession to it as innocent, and tried to say that he's protecting a friend of his called Jason. But this was quickly dismissed by police and prosecutors as just a myth, as obviously he's obsessed with Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th and probably thought he could pin it on some fictional person he had made up for whatever reason. During his trial, Alice Carlisle QC dubbed him the man in black, black of thoughts and blackest of deeds. And this is where he was known to the public afterwards. He'd also go on to say in his interview to the police that he found some pleasure in the attacks he had made. He just had complete and utter pleasure out of seeing people bloodied up, which is what he did when he went out in his Nazi uniform, police uniform, and with his truncheon. In November 1996, he was given 4 whole life sentences. Moore showed no remorse or regret for what he had done. He later tried for parole in 2008 on the grounds of human rights and even went to the European Courts of Human Rights. This was thankfully denied. At the age of 75, Peter Moore still resides in the maximum security prison HMP Wakefield, where he once befriended the notorious Harold Shipman, but that's for another day. So I know that was brief, very brief. You probably didn't hear him. Some of you might know him. People from the UK probably know who Peter Moore was, but most people, they probably never heard of him. And even though he confessed to 4 murders, he also confessed to 40 to 50 plus brutal attacks in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. So, and according to him, none of them escalated to murder, but who knows? Who knows? When you're that vicious, he clearly had no remorse or no regret whatsoever. Who knows? He's never confessed to more than 4. There was also a body found in the Clochainog forest, which in 2015, which apparently Peter Moore confessed that he knew the identity of the body, but they checked out the body and it could have been dumped there from anywhere between the late 90s to the early 2000s. And the reason why it was significant is because Edward Carthy, Peter Moore's second victim, was dumped in that very same forest in 1995. But to this day, they've never pinned that extra body on Peter Moore. And they've never identified him either. So yeah, that was a brief history of Peter Moore, the Man in Black. That's it. Pretty brutal, I know. And who knows if those 4 victims were his only murder victims. Obviously, there were many other victims of his, but those 4 were his only known murder victims. But anyway, that's it. Leave a like if you like this video. Leave a sub if you're new to my channel. I do these quite often. I'll be back again soon with another video in the next few days. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now.